Tom Krawiec published Ranching Like a 12-Year-Old in 2022, which details his ideas on grass management, animal handling, and ranching as a business. Tom is also the author of numerous articles published in On Pasture and Stockman's Grass Farmer, magazines, and various ag-related publications in Alberta, where he's from. He's been featured on several podcasts discussing his ideas about grazing, ranching, and very specifically labor allocation. In his previous life, Tom grew up and then worked in the oil patch in various capacities, from hauling water to being a driller on the oil rigs. In January of 2000, 25 years ago, Tom attended a week-long holistic management course and began his personal journey into ranching. In 2003, he took his first Ranching for Profit course and went on to enjoy their alumni program called Executive Link for several years. Tom has strived to figure out how to simplify daily ranch duties so that a 12 or 80-year-old could handle them easily. He went from grazing 40 cow-calf pairs and 70 hogs in 2000 on 373 acres, scaling up to renting 5,500 acres and grazing 3,000 yearlings just 7 years later in 2007. By keeping things simple, easy, and fun, there was more daily labor required in 2000 with only a few animals than there was in 2007 with that large number. His goal in life has been to learn how to build topsoil rapidly using grazing animals, and he feels he has done this via grazing in the sweet spot, which is what he's going to be talking about in just a moment. For fun and hobbies, when he's not ranching or riding, Tom enjoys scuba diving and studying ecology of the coral reef. It's his life goal to ranch in the summer and go diving in the winter. Tom, where'd you go? There he is. So if you weren't here yesterday, and even if you were, let's welcome Tom Krawiec back to the stage.
Hey, thank you. I'll be here all week.
Did I say it correctly?
Yeah, good job. Thank you very much. That was quite a lengthy introduction, and it sounded like somebody important was getting introduced. So as you know, this presentation today is going to be about grazing in the sweet spot. Now, I came up with that term, I think I started using it in 2008, and since then I've been really developing my skills on how to do this. But something that I have noticed is that when I start talking about grazing in the sweet spot with various producers, what invariably happens is I end up defending myself and kind of an argument. So what I have done is I just stop, and I don't do that anymore. So what I'm asking, I know there's a lot of farmers here, but there's also mixed farmers who have been grazing for quite some time, and what you're going to hear may go against what you're doing and things that you've heard from other people. So just for 40 minutes, I ask, put your I forget what the word I'm looking for, but just put it on the shelf just for 40 minutes and just accept what I'm just going to share with you what I do, okay, and my results from doing that. So a couple house cleaning things you should all be aware of. 82% of all statistics are made up on the spot. And you may hear a few of those today. And one other thing that you should be aware of is not everything that you hear today is 100% true. So let's get going. So just quickly, you know what? I'm not going to do an introduction of how we got started. The introduction that was given, that's pretty much. I grew up in the oil patch, and next thing you know, I'm ranching. So when I started ranching, like I said, we started with going to holistic management in January of 2000. And I really got turned on to grass and ecology. And then from there, I read Andre Voisin's book, Grass Productivity, and I got more excited about grass. But at that time, when I first started, I was grazing in stage 2. But it was early stage 2. So then I wasn't getting great gains on our livestock until August, kind of when the grass started to harden in our area. And I first actually noticed it on our horses because our horses started to get quite fat. So I came upon this a bit by luck, but also one of my feedlot customers told me I need to do better. And I tell you what, that was a big blow to my ego because I thought I was doing a pretty darn good job grazing. And here this guy is telling me I need to do better. But I have to tell you, I already knew in the back of my head that I was missing something. But that was the impetus for me to get on this journey and figure it out. So what I'm going to discuss today, I'm going to give you my definition of the sweet spot, the benefits to the soil biology, benefits to the livestock, benefits to the rancher, and then I'll finish off with explaining how I do it. So first off, what is the sweet spot? So I'm sure pretty much everybody in this room has seen this graph. It's professionally done. You can tell by all the detail in it. So it's the 3 stages of grass growth. And that red part that I have circled there, that is just before forage goes into reproductive phase, phase 3. And that is where the sweet spot is. Now, on a sward level, that's where about 15 to 20% of the forage in the sward is in reproductive phase. The rest is still in stage 2. But another part of grazing in the sweet spot is that I only take 20 to 40% during the growing season. So basically, it's clip and go. So you see, I think Keith actually used a picture very similar to this and just shows how much biomass is under the soil and how much is above soil. Now, I was talking to Dr. Chris Nichols about the idea of grazing in the sweet spot because I know she's a big proponent of feeding the biology more than once a year. And when I mentioned about the sweet spot, she kind of giggled and she said that was a great name because exudates that are released to the soil biology are very sweet. And she found it very apropos. And the other thing that Dr. Nichols talks about is that when soil biology is only fed once a year, it wakes up, it feeds, and then there's no more exudates, so then it goes back dormant. And Dr. Nicole Masters, I've listened to her speak numerous times, and she has commented on more than one occasion that in her opinion, most of the soil biology in North America is sleeping. And I think this is why they're sleeping, or soil biology is sleeping, is because it gets fed once a year. Now, the benefits to the livestock is that livestock is on a high plane of nutrition for the whole grazing season. And I make a point of saying grazing season, not growing season. Because when I graze in the sweet spot, come late fall and winter grazing, I still have high volume, high quality forage. So once I started doing that, I started getting better gains. And I'm talking about, like on heifers, getting about 2.5 pounds, 2.5 pounds a day on heifers. So you get better gains, and then even in the first year of grazing in the sweet spot, people are seeing, myself included, 50 to 60 additional pounds on weaning weights on calves. And in terms of sheep, very consistently, I'm getting lambs that are 110 to 115 pounds in 4.5 months. And the funny thing about this is, I remember I don't know a lot about sheep, I've just learned from observing. But when I talk to sheep producers and I tell them that statistic that I have about getting these lambs to that weight in that short of time, not one, and I mean it not one person has asked me how I do it. They get a glaze over their eyes and they think I'm full of BS, which probably true of that as well. But honestly, not one person I started grazing sheep in 2001. And all those years, not one person has asked me, how do I do it? The other thing about grazing in the sweet spot and being on that high plane of nutrition, with cattle consistently getting 80 to 83% conception rate in the first cycle. Where am I now? Oh, yeah. Okay, so the benefits to the rancher. So, of course, you have more forage per acre, but it's also at a higher quality. So, first off, you can run more animals per acre. But not only that, you have flexibility because you have high quality forage. Now, this picture here, I'll come back to it later, is a picture of my buddy's place, Mike actually, from this fall in mid-November. And this is his calves. They got backgrounded on this for about 6 weeks, 12 cents a day. That's the cost. And actually, that 12 cents a day, there was a little bit of labor. I think labor worked out to about 4 cents a day, and the rest was opportunity cost because he had already grazed in the summer. So basically, that land was paid for by what he harvested in the summer. So, of course, you lower your winter feed cost. And on top of that, when you mesh that with the principles I talked about yesterday, ranching like a 12-year-old, your labor, I'm going to say it's not nothing, but it's probably 10% of what would be normal. Okay, so how do you graze in the sweet spot? This is a grazing chart. And I do not believe that it is possible to graze in the sweet spot without using this as a planning tool. I used my first grazing chart the spring of 2000. And I still, to this day, when I'm managing grass, I cannot do it without that. Not as a record keeping, but as a planning tool to keep me on track. Because I have 2 cardinal rules. Do not violate the graze period, and do not violate the rest period. You can violate everything else, but you can't violate those 2 things. And the only way that I'm able to keep track of that is using the grazing chart. Because my graze year's eye lies to me all the time. And I actually talk about, there's a situation in my book that I talk about where had I not had my grazing chart, I wouldn't have realized that I needed to get into a paddock and graze it, because what was going to happen was the grass was just going to deteriorate because it had already been, it was not going to get any more volume there. So again, graze year's eye is not always accurate. So what I do is Has anybody seen my YouTube video where I explain how to determine the graze period? Crickets, okay. Well, you should do it because it's an amazing video, very professionally done. What I do is I strip graze, just one paddock, and I let the animals determine when the graze period is, or how long the graze period is, sorry. And the way what happens is I watch them, and when they stop in the first strip to regraze, I know that there's enough new growth, and that determines the graze period. So I use the animals to tell me. I don't just guess. And then I take that information and I put it into the formula from Holistic Management, and I pretend that I have 13 paddocks, and then I'm able to figure out the recovery period. Now, something about 13 paddocks, it is mathematically impossible to respect the graze period and respect the recovery period with fewer than 13 paddocks. Because either you are staying too long in a paddock. So at the latitude of Athabasca, the first rotation, it's very specific to your location and conditions. But in the first rotation, for the last 25 years, recovery period at that time is 36 days, and graze period is 3 days. So I cannot be in a paddock longer than 3 days. Because if I'm in a paddock for, let's say, 5 days, there's 2 days of overgrazing. And I'm injuring those plants on day 4 and day 5. Now, we certainly wouldn't let our animals be injured, so why would we let our grass be injured? Now, these next 3 slides, okay, so there's the formula from Holistic Management. I apologize, I should have advanced that sooner, but it is what it is. So the next 3 slides that I'm going to share, that will show you the basis of why grazing in the sweet spot works. Now, these 2 slides, again, I apologize. What happened was I realized shortly before the conference that it would be great to have something visual rather than just me telling you about the research. So that top graph is the sigmoidal curve of grass growth in stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. Now, the bottom one, that is from research that was done in 2001, demonstrating the amount of exudates and the timing in relation to grass growth. So what I did, I overlaid this here, just so that you can get a visual of the stages of grass growth in relation to the percentage of exudates that are released. Now, I'll just share with you, Olak et al. In 2001, they found that exudation rates were, in general, lowest at seedling stage, increased until flowering, but decreased at maturity. And that's why I drew that graph, just for the visual. And you can see, isn't it interesting that it's pretty close to where the intersection of those 2 is pretty close to where the sweet spot is. I didn't do that intentionally. I just realized that after we drew the graph. Another piece of research by Gardia et al., again from 2000, they went on to say that root exudation is positively correlated with root growth. It means that actively growing root systems secrete more exudates. So now here we go. You see that on the right, that picture on the right? That information, that research started in 1955 by Krawiec. And there was plenty of research all the way up till the mid-70s talking about this. The deeper that we go into the sward and defoliate, the more roots that die back. However, as you can see on the left, when we only take, like in my case, when I'm grazing, I only want to take 20 to 40%. So what happens, there is no stoppage, there's no die-off of roots. The roots actively keep growing. So from the research that I have found and that I've read, that means that these roots are continually pulsing out exudates to feed the soil biology. Now, part of grazing in the sweet spot is animal handling, because you need to simplify things, and it needs to be a bit easy to make your life easier. Again, I showed this mob. The cool thing about when we put all these animals together, I liken it to row croppers. So most people rotate year after year. But when, from people that I've talked to, and once they put all these different species together, their production just goes through the roof. So when I put all the animals together, what happens to the grass production is phenomenal. And it does not work when you do a leader follower. There's something about when you put all these animals together, and I equate it to the same way when growing forage or grains, when you put all that polyculture together. So I'm coming back to the grazing chart, because again, I don't know how you can graze in the sweet spot without using it. And I will tell you something, when I'm grazing, I actually don't look at the grass anymore. Definitely not in the first rotation, because it's too easy to stay too long in a paddock, and then the next thing you know, you are 10 days past too long in your recovery period, and your next rotation, all your grazing is stage 3 grass, and you never get caught up. The only way to get caught up is to skip a number of paddocks and start again so that you can get ahead of it. But if you fall behind, you can never get caught up without doing that. But even with my grazing chart and my grazer's eye, I need a check. So what I do is I use cow pats. So that first cow pat, it's like the Goldilocks cow pat. It's not too soft, not too hard. So that cow pat in the center, it stands 2.5 inches high. The one on the left, that's about 4 to 5 inches high. So if I start to see cow pats like that, I know I'm not moving fast enough, because I have moved past that 15 to 20% of forage that's in reproductive phase, and I'm getting more like 30 to 50%. And of course, on the right is lava, and that means that I need to slow down my rotation, because I'm getting too early in stage 2. Now, something else about grazing in the sweet spot to really take my sward, the amount of production that I have in my pastures, to another level, is something I call the tipping point. And the tipping point is where there is enough volume enough biomass so that the system becomes a self-propagating system. And it increases with no outside inputs except our management. And it's very common, once I get to 175 stock days per acre, in 2 to 3 years, I'm 300 plus. And I have done that time and time again. The trick, until you get to 175 stock days per acre, you will plateau. Now, I've listened to Dr. Christine Jones talk about soil biology, and for soil biology to really take off, you need a quorum. This is that tipping point. I see this, it's the same kind of thing. A quorum, you need enough numbers there for it to take off. And it was interesting, I was listening to Keith go on and on about farming. And I'm just kidding. But it was interesting to me, Keith, how the principles that you were talking about, they're exactly the same principles that I'm talking about right now. You know, we talk about, I've mentioned Chris Nichols, Jones, and there's the same soil biologist that you talked about in your presentation. And sometimes I think we have this disconnect between what happens, when farming versus what happens as a grazier. But the principles don't change. Now, I only have a couple of tools that I use to get to that tipping point. So I have always been on the lookout for other tools to help me get there and get me there quickly. So I go down the rabbit hole, I hear some amazing results on something, and I go down the rabbit hole. And then I actually have gone and I've actually tracked down the actual producer. If I can't find the original research, I contact the original producer. And invariably what happens with different soil amendments that I hear about these amazing results, or compost as an example, the amount of forage that is produced after the application is 70 to 100% increase. Now that sounds amazing. But I have a little saying. If you start with bugger all and you double bugger all, you still end up with bugger all. So I want to see the numbers, because to get to the tipping point, to a point where forage production becomes honestly a profitable enterprise on a per acre basis, somehow we have to get to the tipping point. Would you believe, I think I might have time. I was going to skip the numbers part, but it looks like I have enough time. So what I'm going to do is, again, show me the numbers. So basically what I do is I need to start with knowing the class of animal. And it's a standard unit. And so one standard animal unit is the amount of forage that a 1,000-pound dry pregnant cow eats in one day. So that's a standard. So depending on what class of animal, what class of cattle, or what type of species, you can either go up or you can go down. So that's the first thing. And then I figure out stock days per acre. Now, stock days per acre coming from grain farming, stock days per acre would be the equivalent of number of bushels per acre. Or I guess if you're haying, number of bales per acre. So it's basically tons of forage per acre. And that's the formula. So you need to standardize your animal units times the number of days that you're grazing divided by the number of acres. So I just use this little example here just to illustrate. So if you assume 160 acres, 50 cow-calf pairs, 150 days of grazing. So first thing, we need to standardize the 50 cow-calf pairs. Now, I know off the top of my head, because I've been using this for so long, that that's the equivalent of 1.75 standard animal units. And where I get those units from, it's a table at the back of Holistic Management booklet, Aid Memoir, and it has a whole list of different classes of cattle and also sheep. So I standardized it, and I just put it in the formula. Like, this is grade 6 math. Very simple. So 150 days divided by 160 acres, which gets us to 82 stock days per acre. But I don't live on grass. I don't pay my mortgage with grass. I want to know how much revenue I get from the grass. So what I do is I figure out what the custom grazing rate in the area is for, or what the going rate for custom grazing is. Now, I know if you own your own cattle, yeah, you don't pay it. But I liken it as you have a feed cost in the winter. All you're doing in the summer is you're just replacing hay or silage with forage. So it's still an expense. So I just, yes, it may be, we can have semantics about, an argument about semantics. I just think that it's a valuable tool to use to see where you're at in terms of dollars per acre. So all I do is, I'm going to use the $2 a day per pair as a custom grazing rate. So I just multiply that through, and what it works out to, because I have to convert it to so many dollars per stock day. And in this case, it works out to $1.14 per stock day. And in the previous example, we were producing 82 stock days per acre times $1.14 times per stock day. That's your gross revenue per acre. So it really changes things, particularly if your rent per acre, is $80 to $90. It doesn't give you a lot to raise your family and pay your mortgage. And the reason I like this is because there's no BS. Those numbers don't lie. So now I know where I'm at. Now I can start doing something about it. In my opinion, anyways. And really, I want to say we can do better. And I honestly think that we should. So I'm just going to conclude here with something I realized this fall. So yes, that's the moon. And I watched this movie called Hidden Figures. And in that movie, it's a Kevin Costner movie, and what the real story is about, the people who did the calculations before we had computers, and they did all the math to enable the U.S. to orbit the Earth for the first time. Now, the thing when I was watching that movie, I was wondering, how did they keep going? Because they were spending millions and millions of dollars, so much time, and they knew they did not have the technology to do it. They didn't even have the math, and they knew that. So why did they keep going? Like, what motivated them? And I realized because they could see the moon. Everybody can see the moon. We know it's there. Now, I'm going to get to my point because my friend Mike, I've lamented to him many times in the past probably 10 years, I don't know why people aren't getting excited about grazing in the sweet spot. And Mike's answer to me, well, maybe, Tom, you're the only one who can do it. And I know that's not true because it's a very simple thing. It's a subtle shift of what a lot of people are doing already. So why aren't people getting excited? And what happened was Mike got hurt, so I ended up going, and I ended up being there 6 weeks straight. I started his grazing, and I was there periodically throughout the growing and fall season. And something I've always wanted to do is I want to fence line wean and background on high quality forage. And so there was this one paddock, and I said, Mike, would you be game to do this? And by that time, he is already trusting me because he had saw, what was happening. And he started to become a believer. And so that's what I did. And I background these calves. Fence line weaned, and then I background these calves. And the one day I had just moved the calves, and Mike come out, and he's talking to me, and he's in awe. And he says, Tom, had I not seen this, I did not know it was possible. I said, yeah, Mike. And how hard was it? He said it was nothing. He kept around the home place, he kept 13 crocky cows that he didn't want to send out to pasture. And he just moved them around. And he got that kind of grass. And then I said, yeah, you know what the hardest part of this operation was? The 15 years I had to deal with a hard-headed Mike to convince him to do this. Mike saw the moon. And I think that's why people don't get excited about what's possible. We know this level is possible. We don't even know this level exists. And so what I'm going to show you, this is a feed test I took of that forage before we put the calves on. Because again, I don't trust my grazer's eye, so I want to know what I'm feeding those animals. So here, you'll see I keep things simple, so there's two things that I look at. I look at protein, and I look at energy, TDN. Those are the two things that I look at. And the other stuff I don't actually understand. However, I do know that if I keep my protein above 14, 15%, and my TDN above 60%, I can graze almost anything through any conditions, and the animals will do fantastic on it. Now that 24% protein, that's a little high. I've never had that before, but I've consistently had 18 to 20% on stockpiled forage. And that sample was taken, I think late October, I took that sample. Now here I'm coming back to these backgrounded calves. Now that picture may not look that spectacular, but I tell you what they're walking on is about a foot deep of that lush grass, that high quality grass. And those calves, we didn't push them. We just, they were just creaming everything. But again, 12 cents a day for 6 weeks. I tell you what, Mike was just tickled pink. He just, I don't know how many times he told me, I just can't believe this. I can't believe this. So that's what I call the moon. And it'd be cool if we could all get there. So the takeaway, again, need to use the grazing chart. Need to keep the forage green. Somehow, a person has to get to the tipping point. So whatever it takes, fertilizer, whatever, that's the start point, in my opinion, is the tipping point. And then I don't know where we can go after that. The highest that I ever did myself was 525 stock days per acre. However, when I did that, I was scraping the pastures at that time, which I don't believe, in my experience, is beneficial long term. Yes, I did get 525 stock days per acre, but I don't think I could do that scraping the pasture, forever. Oh, and one other thing, I just want to mention, use your own numbers. It's very easy to look over the fence and compare yourself to your neighbor. But again, if you're just doing twice or three times better than your neighbor, and your neighbor isn't doing very well at all, it doesn't mean that you're doing very well. So use your own numbers, in my opinion. So you know what? I have to thank you. Very attentive, and I've had amazing feedback, and I tell you what, you have been so gracious. Oh, I just remembered what I talked about here today. I actually wrote a paper that details all the research, because I just touched on a couple of things, but there's a pile of research to back up my observations of grazing in the sweet spot. And I wrote that paper, and it's available on my webpage for free. You can download it. If you want a hard copy, it's $5 just to cover the printing cost. So if you're interested, there you go. And also, if you want to buy my book, simplyranching.ca, or I have a number of books with me. You can. Cool. Thanks again.
All right, thank you, Tom. We probably have a minute for maybe one question from the audience. Anybody got a burning desire?
So my question is relating to maybe haying. Is there a way that you've found that growers are maybe taking this approach with haying land?
I'm sure that would work.
Can we turn Tom's mic back on, please? Oh, or here, I'll just hand this one off.
Again, I never hayed, so I don't want to answer that. However, just thinking principle-wise, I'm sure that would work great. I tell you what, I do know that I have bought a lot of crappy hay because that's all that was available, and my stockpiled forage was amazingly better than the hay that I bought, and I think because those principles haven't been followed through. So then the hay gets put up too late. That's it, eh?
Well, only.
If you would like to go over those numbers. Oh, sorry. One other thing, I want to offer is I don't fly out till tomorrow. So if you would like to sit down at the end of the conference and I could go through those numbers. You can do it yourself. I'll just walk you through it so you can have your numbers for yourself. I'll certainly stay afterwards tonight and do that with you.
And only because he's the chairman of the coalition, I'll hand the microphone to Sean.
So, Tom, when you...
I'm done.
No, you stay there. When you, let's say you pick up a new pasture, a new paddock, and you're not exactly sure what the carrying capacity would be on that chunk of land. What is your starting point? Where do you go clip it, or do you ask the owner, how many bales of hay can you get off of this?
Yes, when I first started, that's what I would do. I'd ask the owner how many bales, because I know that one stock day is the equivalent of approximately 24 pounds of dry matter. And in my mind, I work in stock days, just the way I started from holistic management. So yes, I started out with asking how many bales. Now I have enough experience that I can walk through a pasture and I have a pretty good idea because I've kept those records of I know what I know what 50, I know what 100 stock days per acre feels like. I'll tell you what, if you're wondering what 325 stock days per acre feels like, you do not ride your horse faster than a walk through a pasture like that, because it's very dangerous. They're going to trip and they're going to fall and you're going to get hurt. And that's what it feels like if you want to experience something like that, or try and get in your head what it feels like.
Thank you. You may go now.
Thank you.